When it comes to Japanese aircraft carriers, the Hyo class is often a bit forgotten, lost in the shadow of the Kido Butai, despite fighting just as hard in their own right. In fact, these ships would be present at some of the largest battles the Japanese fought, outside of Midway, of course, with Junyo, the second ship, being particularly notable, serving from the Aleutians to Guadalcanal. In this, she came out without damage, but her luck would run out in other areas, with the ship suffering repeated damage, such as bombs at the Battle of the Philippine Sea, and multiple run-ins with American submarines that did varying degrees of damage, with the ship ultimately damaged beyond economical repair and left moored in Japan at the end of the war. Considering Junyo was built off a converted ocean liner, her sheer durability is something to be respected. Not to mention the fact she was one of very few veteran Japanese warships to survive the war. Despite this, her story is, again, overlooked in popular imagination. Today's video will, hopefully, rectify this at least a bit. We'll cover Junyo from her ocean liner origins to her stubborn refusal to sink, starting, of course, when the ship was first laid down. This came on March 20th, 1939. At the time, Junyo was named Kashiwara Maru. She was a fast passenger liner intended for the Japan Mail Steamship Company. As it would turn out, however, this never came to pass. While still under construction, the ship was purchased by the Japanese Navy on February 10th, 1941, to be specific, explicitly with the intention of a future aircraft carrier conversion. I've touched on this before when I've covered Japanese light carriers. The Japanese, in their continuing efforts to snub naval treaties, had this plan set up: to build naval auxiliaries, or in this case ocean liners, with every intention of converting them later. These aren't like the Independence class or the escort carriers. This was very much an intentional move from the start. Thus, Kashiwara Maru would become Junyo. Launched on June 26, 1941, with fitting out taking another year. Junyo would ultimately be commissioned on May 3, 1942, well into the Pacific War. Only a month, in fact, before the Kido Butai was mauled at Midway. And Junyo suddenly became rather more important than the Japanese might have expected. With that in mind, let's look at her design real quick before we move on. As converted, Junyo displaced 24,140 tons at the standard loading, slightly lighter than her ocean liner design. Even the normal load only went up to just shy of 27,000 tons. 26,949 to be specific. That displacement came from a decently large aircraft carrier. The ship was 219 meters, 719 feet long, with a flight deck of 210 meters, 690 feet in length. Junyo's beam was 26 meters, 87 feet, while her flight deck was 27 meters, or 89 feet. You can see why the Japanese wanted these ships. Junyo's flight deck and hangar supported an air wing of 42 to 48 aircraft. Initially a dozen Zeros with 18 dive bombers and 18 torpedo bombers, Aichi D-3A Vals and Nakajima B-5N Kates respectively. This would later be changed to 21 Zeros, 12 Vals, and 9 Kates. A decent offensive punch for what was a converted ocean liner. It actually puts her in line with the British armored carriers prior to them adopting a deck park. This has led to some discussion on what exactly to classify the Hiyos. Most sources will call them some form of light carrier. Others will insist they were a fleet carrier in every regard but speed. Regardless of what you call the ship, her defensive weaponry was decently heavy. 12 127mm 5-inch guns in 6 twin mountings, with 24 25mm guns in 8 triple mounts. Although she would get a lot more of those guns as the war went on. Unfortunately, armor protection wasn't quite so extensive. The ships did receive about 2 inches of armor around the machinery, and an inch around the magazines, 51 and 25 millimeters respectively. All of this was pushed through the water at a maximum of 25.5 knots by 56,250 shaft horsepower. This came from an interesting hybrid layout. Destroyer boilers driving merchant turbines through 2 shafts. This proved to be problematic in service, and the ships often struggled to reach their top speed, with Junyo only managing 26 knots on the ship's sea trials. That said, we've reached the end of the design details, with one final note in their distinctive bridge tower. The first time the Japanese integrated the funnel with the bridge, and a design you see repeated on Taiho and Shinano. Now back to service. As noted, Junyo was commissioned on May 3, 1942, at the time carrying 12 Zeros with 3 spares for her fighters, alongside 18 D3As with 2 spares and 18 B5Ns, 48 active aircraft and 5 spares for 53 in all. However, that air group wouldn't immediately be put to use. Junyo's trials kept her close to Japan through May 1942, including very nearly colliding with the much larger Yamato on May 19th. Combined Fleet describes this as almost sideswiping the battleship. I shudder to think of what even a minor collision would have done to Junyo. Fortunately for the Japanese, that wouldn't happen. The 2 ships continued on their way, with Junyo soon assigned to the Aleutian Islands operation. In this, she would operate alongside Ryujo, with the 2 ships departing Japan alongside their escorts on May 29, 1942. They would arrive off the Aleutians on June 3rd, where Ryujo and Junyo sent up airstrikes against the main American base at Dutch Harbor, Alaska. The initial attempts went poorly. The first strike was aborted due to foul weather, and the second would go much the same. The third strike on June 4th was more successful. The Japanese managed to hit Dutch Harbor with 31 aircraft, primarily targeting shore installations. This caused some notable damage, although the Japanese didn't escape without losses of their own. They lost several aircraft, with the most notable coming from Ryujo, that being the Zero flown by Tadayoshi Koga, that crashed on Akutan Island. As for Junyo, she remained in the area until June 28th, supporting Aleutian operations, including fending off an attack by B-26 bombers on June 5th. Junyo would only return home, as it turned out, in early July, arriving back in Japan on July 13th for a refit that ran through the end of the month. It's at this point, in light of the losses at Midway, that Junyo was redesignated as a full fleet carrier, a role she would serve in for the rest of her active duty, although she had to wait a while for more combat, because Junyo was on refit or training through to October 1942, with the ship only leaving Japanese waters on October 4th, at first to Truk and then on October 11th for the Solomons, and her first duel against American aircraft carriers at Santa Cruz. However, before then, the ship had one preliminary engagement. On the morning of October 17th, 1942, Junyo and Hyo launched a strike on American transports. This consisted of 36 aircraft directed at Lunga Point. While ostensibly targeting transports, the air group instead focused on two destroyers, USS Aaron Ward and USS Lardner. Both ships would escape without damage, while the Japanese lost 7 of their torpedo bombers, along with 1 Zero, with only 1 Wildcat shot down to show for it. To rub salt in the wound, Hyo suffered a machinery fire and had to leave the area on October 22nd, after transferring spare aircraft to Junyo to reinforce her air group. With this composite air wing, Junyo launched an unsuccessful airstrike on Henderson Field on October 25th. Little damage would be done, but at least she didn't lose any aircraft, which would be a good thing as the Battle of Santa Cruz came on October 26, 1942. In this action, Junyo sent out 17 dive bombers and 12 Zeros around 7 a.m. on October 26th. These aircraft would split between 3 ships. 10 struck Enterprise for no damage and 8 shot down. Others struck South Dakota, landing a hit to the forward turret. This failed to penetrate the armor, although 50 men were wounded, with more damage done to the cruiser San Juan, which temporarily lost steering. Junyo had a far more successful second strike, where torpedo bombers crippled Hornet. At the time, she was under tow by USS Northampton, a towing attempt that was abandoned because an aircraft from either Junyo or Shoukaku hit Hornet in the engine room. This knocked out power and wrecked the crew's repair work, leading to Hornet being abandoned and later sunk by Japanese destroyers. Through all of this, Junyo evaded damage of her own, although her composite air wing was savaged in the fighting, leading to the ship being called back to Truk alongside Zuikaku, where she would remain until November 9th. At this point, with her air group a mix of whatever planes were available, Junyo set out again. Her first mission would be covering the crippled Hiei on November 13th, 1942. Despite heroic efforts by Junyo's fighters, this would be a doomed cause. Hiei would be struck by American aircraft and later sink. After this, Junyo would remain in the area on patrol duty until November 16th, 1942, with the ship back in Truk on November 18th. For the rest of 1942 after this point, she would operate on escort or patrol duty, including covering the occupation of Hollandia in December 1942, with this pattern continuing into early 1943, including a feint to draw American attention from the evacuation of Guadalcanal on January 31st. After this, Junyo saw a fairly quiet 1943. She would undergo a refit at Kure in February that ran through mid-March, with the carrier back at Truk by the end of that month. And there she would remain for a good part of the year. From March 27th to July 8th, Junyo remained moored at that island. Her air wing would operate from land bases in the Solomons, where it sank USS Aaron Ward on April 7th, 1943. But the carrier remained in port. And even when she left harbor, well, Junyo remained on second line duty. She would operate as an aircraft and troop transport for the rest of 1943. Valuable work, to be sure, but not exactly the most eventful. The Japanese were holding their carriers back for the most part. Unfortunately, this wouldn't save her from damage. On November 5th, 1943, Junyo's group was spotted by USS Halibut. One torpedo hit Junyo in the stern, destroying her steering gear, and jamming the rudder along with damaging the prop shafts. Repairs for this damage kept the carrier in dock for the rest of 1943, and into 1944 for that matter. As her air wing was mauled at land bases, Junyo remained in Japan. In fact, she wouldn't leave again until May 11th, between refits and training, with Junyo arriving in the Philippines on May 16th for yet more training, this time in preparation for the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944. This battle came on June 19th, 1944, and in common with other Japanese aircraft carriers, well, Junyo's air group would be torn to ribbons in the Marianas Turkey Shoot, while Junyo herself would be attacked on June 20th. The ship was hit in the island by 1 or 2 bombs, which wrecked the funnel. Near misses would crumple plating and cause minor flooding in the steering room, with 53 of the crew lost on the bridge. Fortunately, the damage was relatively minor. However, with her air group wrecked, Junyo returned home. She arrived in Japan on July 6, 1944, for another refit, with the carrier coming out in August 1944, for more training through to early October of that year. The combination of the refit and the training kept Junyo in home waters, instead of sailing with the doomed Northern Force for Leyte Gulf. That probably spared the ship the fate of being sunk in battle. Instead, she was assigned to transport troops and ammunition to the Philippines, something she would continue through to December 1944, with the ship's luck finally running out on December 8th. Junyo's group was attacked by 3 submarines: USS Sea Devil, USS Place, and USS Redfish. Junyo would take 2 torpedo hits in this attack. One to the tip of the bow, as you can see here in dry dock. Another hit the ship in the starboard engine room. Junyo limped back to Japan at 13 knots, but she was out of the war at this point. Her starboard engine room was never repaired, although the ship was out of dock by the end of January 1945. At which point, for lack of pilots and fuel, Junyo was left in port. She escaped any damage in the various air raids, allowing the ship to still be afloat when Japan surrendered in August 1945. American officers would examine the carrier in October before declaring her unfit for repatriation duty, with Junyo, a survivor until the end, ultimately scrapped in 1946 and 1947. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and I'll see you in the next one.